What do you mean Emily will own the company? My voice was steady, but under the polished table, my hands clenched so tightly I could feel the nails digging into my palms. Above us, the chandelier cast a soft golden light over the dinner table. The crystal glasses sparkled. The wine was expensive. The roast was perfectly plated. Everything looked beautiful. But the air, it had gone ice cold. My father, Richard Marks, CEO of Marks Global Logistics, didn't even look up from his steak. He just kept cutting calmly, methodically, like we were talking about the weather. Elena, he sighed like he was explaining basic math to a slow child. Let's be realistic. He finally glanced at me, not with warmth, not with pride, just mild annoyance. You're great with the technical side of things. Everyone knows that. But leadership, that's not where you shine. We need someone who has presence. Someone people will follow. Emily's the right choice. Emily, my younger sister. The one who had never touched a line of code, never stayed up until 3 a.m., debugging warehouse routing protocols, never walked into a boardroom full of panicked executives trying to explain how we were losing $20 million a quarter. I stared at her. Sitting across the table in her sleek designer dress, she swirled her wine with one hand and offered me a small, knowing smile. Not smug, not gloating, worse confident, like she'd already won. She hadn't been there when the company was drowning. She hadn't seen what I had seen: spreadsheets, bleeding red, employees crying in stairwells, vendors threatening to pull contracts. She wasn't there when I had built the software that saved everything, the automation system that turned a collapsing logistics chain into a seamless global powerhouse. I had built that. I had rebuilt the company from the ashes. I developed the software that turned this company around, I said. My voice didn't shake, not yet. But it was sharper now, slicing through the awkward clink of silverware. Without it, you wouldn't even have a company to pass down. Dad chuckled. Like what I said was adorable. Then he reached into his wallet and tossed a crumpled $50 bill onto the table. For your effort, he said. The room went quiet. Mom shifted in her seat but said nothing. Emily took a sip of wine. The chandelier above us buzzed faintly, and I just stared at that bill. $50 for the nights I hadn't gone home, for the time I spent staring at error logs until my eyes burned, for the weekends I spent redrawing systems architecture while everyone else was at the lake house. $50. I picked it up, turned it over in my fingers. My breath came out slower than I expected. Calm. Too calm. Then I folded the bill into my napkin and stood. Elena, don't be dramatic, Dad said, rolling his eyes like I was throwing a tantrum over a bad grade. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I just smiled. I'm not being dramatic, I said. I'm just excusing myself. Clearly, I'm not the main character in this little family narrative, so I'll remove myself from the scene. Emily chuckled under her breath. Mom whispered, Elena. But I was already walking. The click of my heels echoed off the marble floor like a slow, deliberate drumbeat. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even close it hard. I just left. And the next morning, I arrived at the office early, just like always. But everything was already different. The office had changed. Just a year ago, it had felt like a crumbling fortress, tight shoulders, whispered layoffs, entire departments vanishing overnight. But now it was sleek, polished. The lobby walls were plastered with corporate awards, and the receptionist greeted me like nothing was wrong. Except everything was. I noticed it right away. People wouldn't meet my eyes. Conversations quieted when I passed. Someone from HR actually turned and walked the other way when they saw me. It was subtle but deliberate. When I reached my office, the door was already open. Inside, my desk had been cleared. My monitor gone, personal items gone. Even the brass plate that used to say Elena Marks, CTO, had been removed. Sitting in my chair, legs crossed, flipping casually through a manila folder, was Emily. She looked up like she had been waiting to deliver a punchline. Oh, morning, Elena, she said, all cheer. Didn't Dad tell you I'm moving into this office? She gestured around like she was giving a real estate tour. You'll be reporting to me now. I felt my stomach drop, but my face didn't move. What's my position? I asked calmly. She tilted her head, mock thoughtful. We'll figure something out. Maybe IT support, in the company I rebuilt. She leaned back with a smirk. Dad actually suggested you take a little time off. Relax. Maybe do some hobby projects. But don't worry, you're still part of the company. She said it like a mercy. I nodded once, understood. And then I turned and walked out. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me cracked clean down the middle. They didn't just want to sideline me. They wanted me erased. They wanted me to disappear quietly and accept the scraps they tossed my way, maybe even thank them for letting me stay. But I didn't quit. The next day, I showed up just like always. Only this time, they gave me a desk in the far corner of the floor tucked between the copy machine and an intern named Molly, who still called me ma'am. No one spoke to me unless they had to. They acted like I was a ghost haunting a place I no longer belonged to. So I watched, and what I saw made everything crystal clear. Emily was in way over her head. She ran the company like it was a fashion blog. Endless meetings about brand mood and aesthetic cohesion. She ignored the supply chain reports, dismissed warnings from logistics teams, fired 3 department heads who tried to advise her replacing them with her yoga buddies and wine club friends. The same company I had dragged out of a fire with my bare hands was being slowly, elegantly dismantled. I lasted 2 weeks in that corner cubicle, just long enough to gather what I needed, long enough to know they would destroy themselves, and I was going to let them. But not before I built something better. Late one evening, I sat in the back of a quiet cafe downtown with 3 people who meant more to me than any title ever had. Jake, former CFO numbers savant, the one who balanced the books while the walls were falling. Maya, data analyst extraordinaire, the brain behind our client segmentation systems. David, lead engineer, and the only other person who had stayed up coding with me through 40-hour caffeine-fueled marathons. All 3 had resigned quietly within the last month. They'd seen the signs. Elena, Jake said, leaning forward. What's the play here? I slid a folder across the table. Inside was everything I'd been working on in secret, a cleaner, smarter version of the original logistics software. This one didn't just improve operations. It predicted bottlenecks, restructured workflows, auto-adjusted for international compliance issues. It was years ahead. We're building something new, I said. No hesitation, no selling needed. They were in. What Emily and my father didn't know was that the original code, the base I had started years ago, was written well before I ever uploaded anything to company servers. The final version, the one with the real intelligence, I never gave it to them. It was still mine. And now it was going to power a competitor. In just 3 weeks, I pitched it to 3 firms. All of them competitors. All of them struggling to keep up. And I didn't just get offers. I got a contract. A $50 million contract. The ink was still drying when the first domino fell. A long-term client of Caldwell's, one they'd had for over a decade, suddenly pulled their contract. Quietly, no big scene. Just a clean cut. 2 days later, another client followed. Then another. By the end of the month, Caldwell Enterprises was bleeding. Emily panicked. She fired people at random. She tried to pivot. Hired a brand consultant. Released a TikTok ad campaign. It was laughable. But I didn't laugh. I kept building. Nova Systems, our new company, went from a coffee shop idea to a growing startup with a product 10x better than anything in the market. Investors noticed. Partners reached out. Clients signed. And word got around. Not officially, of course, but quietly in the corridors of boardrooms and back-channel emails, people started whispering, "She's back. She built something better. She's not done." Then came the gala, the annual Tech Innovators Gala, the single most high-profile event in our industry. The kind of place where future CEOs are minted, where venture capitalists hand out millions between bites of truffle risotto. And that year, I was the guest of honor. As I stepped onto the stage, heels echoing on polished marble, the host said my name. Elena Marks, the visionary behind Nova Systems, the software revolutionizing global logistics. The applause was deafening, but as I scanned the crowd, I saw them. My father, my sister, sitting at the back like ghosts of an empire that was already gone. And I smiled, not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in their shadow. I was standing in my own light. 3 days after the gala, the phone call came. It was my assistant Claire. "Elena," she said, voice measured, "your father and sister are here to see you." For a moment, I said nothing. Just sat there staring at the skyline outside my window, the same skyline they once ruled. I leaned back in my chair. "Send them in." They walked into my office slowly, like people who had aged and fast forward. My father, once so composed, looked 10 years older than he had at the dinner table that night. Emily still wore expensive clothes, but the confidence was gone. Her movements were stiff, cautious. They sat across from me without being asked. "Elena," my father started, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow, said nothing. He cleared his throat. "We've had our differences. But at the end of the day, we're family. Caldwell Enterprises is struggling. We need your help." There it was. I let the silence stretch. Emily shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the armrest. Finally, I spoke. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" "We're offering you a leadership position," he said quickly, like the words were burning his tongue. "Something meaningful, second in command. We need someone with technical experience." Beneath the desk, my hands curled into fists. "Second in command." To Emily. I blinked, once, twice. Then I laughed. Emily flushed. "Grow up, Elena. You built some software. Great. But that doesn't mean you know how to run a company at this scale." I leaned forward, voice low. "My company is worth 500 million euros, is about 6 weeks from liquidation. Explain to me again, which one of us doesn't know how to run a company?" Silence. My father clenched his jaw. "Elena, please." That word. Please. The same man who once tossed a $50 bill in my direction, like it was a gold medal, was now sitting in my office begging. I had never felt so calm. "No," I said simply. Emily's face twisted. "Excuse me." I turned to her. "I said no. I don't need Caldwell Enterprises. You needed me and you threw me away. Now you get to live with that decision." My father's frustration slipped through. "You're really going to let your own family fail?" "I didn't let anything happen," I said, rising from my seat. "You destroyed this company the moment you gave Emily the reins." Emily shot to her feet, red-faced. "You've always been jealous of me." I looked her dead in the eyes. "Jealous, Emily? I don't need to be jealous. I already have everything you ever wanted." She had no response. None. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. I straightened my blouse and walked to the door. "Elena," my father tried again. I turned back once. "You taught me everything I needed to know. Unfortunately for you, I learned it all." And I left them sitting there. 2 ghosts from a crumbling empire. That could have been the end. But it wasn't. 3 days later, the headline dropped. "Caldwell Enterprises files for bankruptcy." It was everywhere, front pages, investor reports, LinkedIn think pieces. The company that once defined the logistics industry was being torn apart. And in every single article, there was one name that came up over and over again. Mine. The reason Caldwell survived its first collapse, Elena Marks. The reason it fell the second time. She wasn't there to save it. I was in a meeting when Claire came in with a folder. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing it to me. I opened it. Liquidation filings. The entire company was being broken up. Assets sold, patents auctioned. Even the Caldwell name was up for sale. My breath caught. They were desperate. Richard had over-leveraged the company, taken on bad loans. And now the banks were seizing everything. I could have walked away. I should have. But I couldn't stop thinking about that dinner. That $50 bill. That quiet moment when I realized I was disposable in their eyes. No, they didn't just need to fail. They needed to disappear. I picked up the phone. "I'd like to place a direct bid on all Caldwell Enterprises assets," I said, including the name. The bankruptcy attorney on the other end hesitated. "Ms. Marks, do you understand what that would mean?" "I understand perfectly." A week later, I was sitting in the same boardroom my father once ruled over like a king. Only this time, I was the one holding the crown. The paperwork was in front of me, the final contract. One signature away from owning everything they built. Emily and Richard sat across from me, both silent, both pale. My father looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Emily wouldn't even meet my eyes. "I still can't believe you're doing this," she said, voice bitter. I raised an eyebrow. "Doing what? Buying a failed company. Acquiring a name no one respects." She scowled. "You know what I mean." I leaned back in my chair. "Funny," I said. "A year ago, you didn't think I was capable of running a company. Now suddenly, I have too much power." Richard clenched his jaw. "Just sign the damn papers." I picked up the pen, paused, then slid the documents back across the table. Richard blinked. "What is this?" "A counteroffer." He flipped to the first page. His face drained of color. Emily snatched the document. "You're dissolving Caldwell Enterprises." she gasped. You're shutting it down. I nodded. My voice was calm. That's right. Richard looked like he'd explode. Why would you do that? Because I don't need Caldwell Enterprises, I said. But I do want one thing. I pointed to the final clause. Emily read it aloud, voice shaking. All remaining rights to the Caldwell name, patents, and intellectual property will be absorbed by Nova Systems and permanently retired. She stared at me, eyes wide. You're not just buying it, you're erasing it. Yes, the empire that once erased me. I was erasing it right back. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, out of choice, out of power, out of peace. This was my closure. I picked up the pen again and signed. The ink had barely dried when I stepped out of that boardroom. The silence after the signature was louder than applause. My father had nothing left to say. Emily stood frozen, the reality of it sinking in that the company she once sat on top of had not just been taken, but erased. Not restructured, not rescued. Erased. It was done. Caldwell Enterprises no longer existed, and neither did the version of me who once begged to belong. That night, I stood in my penthouse apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing with city lights, and looked down at the streets I used to walk as just a daughter, just an employee, just technical support. Now, I was the one whose name was whispered in rooms where power moved. But the victory didn't feel like fire. It felt like silence, like peace. Nova Systems surged. With no competition from Caldwell, we secured exclusive contracts that had been locked away for years, international distribution giants, private security tech, even government logistics arms. We weren't just a startup anymore. We were the future. I hired people based on skill, not legacy. I promoted based on contribution, not cocktail party charisma. We ran lean. We ran fast. And for the first time, I didn't have to beg to be heard. Every Monday, I led the strategy meeting myself. No pomp, no drama. Just clarity. Every Friday, I walked the floor, checking in on every team, every name, every problem. And every time I passed the large, etched glass panel near the main entrance that read, Nova Systems, I felt it again. I had built this. Not with approval, not with permission, but with intention. Still some nights I couldn't sleep, because even when you win, the past doesn't always let go. Then one afternoon, Claire buzzed into my office. You've received a letter, she said. No return address. I raised an eyebrow. It was simple. Cream cardstock, neatly folded. Inside, in rough, familiar handwriting, Elena, I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll understand. Dad. I stared at it. For a long time. Then I stood, walked over to the fireplace in my office, and dropped it into the flames. Some stories don't get rewritten. Some chapters are meant to burn. 3 months passed. Revenue $500 million. Market share 62%. Status uncontested leader. But those weren't the numbers that meant the most. What mattered were the things I never had before. A company where women could speak and not be interrupted. A workspace where interns were mentored, not used. A boardroom where silence wasn't punishment, but strategy. I didn't build Nova to prove anything anymore. I built it to last. Then came an envelope. Elegant, heavy, gold-rimmed. It was an invitation. The Caldwell family annual gala. I almost laughed. They didn't even own the house anymore. It had been sold at auction after the bankruptcy. Someone else had revived the gala, probably without even realizing the irony. I could have ignored it, but something told me I needed to go. Not for them, for me. So I went. In a custom-tailored black velvet gown, hair-pinned back heels silent and sharp, I arrived just after 9 p.m. The estate once ours had been remodeled, modernized. Same bones, but it no longer felt like home. Just another stop in someone else's portfolio. Inside, the usual crowd buzzed with champagne and old money ego. But this time, something was different. This time the room looked at me. I passed clusters of executives who once called me kiddo. They moved aside, smiled too widely. One tried to offer me a deal over shrimp cocktail. I walked past. And then I saw them. My father, my sister, not center stage anymore, not holding court. Just present, dimmed. My father looked smaller than I remembered. The confidence was gone. In its place, something I had never seen before. Regret? Emily tried to hold her posture chin high, glass steady, but her eyes darted when she saw me. Her fingers clenched tighter around her stemware. I didn't hesitate. I walked toward them. My heels clicked against marble. My presence cleared a path. When I reached them, my father turned. "Elena," he said. "Quiet. Not a command, not a reprimand. A recognition. Dad?" A pause stretched between us, like all the unspoken years hung in the space. "I suppose this is the part where you gloat," he said, lips barely moving. I smiled slightly. "No. This is the part where I say goodbye." Emily blinked. "What?" "I didn't come here to remind you of what you lost," I said, my voice calm. "Because honestly, it's not my concern anymore." I set down my drink on a passing tray and looked at them both. "For years I tried to earn your approval. I stayed late. I worked harder. I made myself small just to be seen." I exhaled slowly. "But I don't need that anymore." I turned to Emily. "And I don't hate you. I never did." She flinched. "I pity you," I continued. "Because unlike you, I didn't have to steal power. I built my own." Her lips parted. No words came out. I nodded once, then turned and walked away. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't owe them anything. I didn't look back. I walked out of the gala the same way I had walked out of that dining room a year ago, composed, silent, unshaken. But this time, I wasn't walking away from power. I was the power. That night, as the city glimmered around me, and the hum of the chauffeured car muffled the noise of the world, I finally let it sink in. It was over. Not the success, not the journey, but the war. There were no more apologies to chase. No more rooms I needed to prove myself in. No more family scripts I had to act out. I had rewritten the ending. And this time, I was the author. A week later, Nova Systems finalized a deal that put us on the global map permanently, an exclusive logistics contract with a major international government entity. The kind of deal that reshapes industries, not just companies. My team celebrated. Our headquarters overflowed with champagne and laughter. People hugged. They danced in the hallways. For some, it was a financial milestone. For others, proof they had bet on the right vision. But for me, it was something else entirely. It was the moment I realized I wasn't just surviving my past anymore. I was thriving beyond it. We hired another 200 employees that quarter, launched a mentorship initiative, sponsored scholarships for women in tech. I poured resources into the kind of leadership I wished I'd had, and then became it. There were moments where I'd still catch flashes of the past, when I'd walk past the old Caldwell building, now leased by a co-working startup, or when a familiar last name popped up in an industry newsletter attached to a flailing personal project my sister was launching. But I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt distance and clarity. One morning, Claire walked into my office, holding a legal envelope. "Looks like the final paperwork came through," she said. It was a certificate of closure. Caldwell Enterprises dissolved. No remaining assets, no outstanding debts, no legacy left behind. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. A chapter I had spent my whole life trying to belong in, officially sealed shut. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my home, no noise, no celebration, I took out a blank journal and wrote one sentence. I didn't take revenge. I took back my name. Because that's what it really was. Not destruction, reclamation, of my voice, of my worth, of my future. A month later, I was asked to speak at a global tech summit. The same summit that had once rejected my application to present a case study back when I still had daughter, listed in my professional bio. This time, I walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. I shared my story, not the petty parts, not the scandal, but the truth. How systems built on ego eventually rot. How being underestimated is a weapon if you know how to wield it. And how silence is sometimes the loudest answer. After the speech, I walked off stage and found a note in my dressing room. It was unsigned, written in delicate cursive. "You didn't just build a company, you built a standard. Thank you." I still don't know who left it. But I remember thinking that's enough. Validation no longer needed to come with a family crest or a corporate title. It could come quietly, like peace, like knowing you survived, like knowing you won without needing to say so. That weekend I flew to the coast, left my phone off for 3 days, watched the sun set with my feet in the sand, and finally, I stopped waiting for the next battle. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving I was always right to believe in myself. And if you're wondering whether I'd do it all again, I would. Every late night, every overlooked meeting, every insult dressed as advice. Because they gave me the one thing I never would have found otherwise, a reason to walk away and build something they could never take from me. They thought they could silence me with a title I didn't need, a room I didn't ask for, and a $50 bill they called gratitude. But I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standard. I didn't take revenge, I took back control. I didn't destroy them. I simply built something they couldn't touch. The truth is, I never wanted their seat at the table. I was meant to build my own. And when they finally came knocking, I didn't open the door. I closed it for good. Because some stories aren't about winning back what was taken. They're about realizing you were always meant to have more.